Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Let There Be Light. Let There Be Light is a thought leadership series brought to you by Akinwunmi and Busari, a corporate commercial law firm situated in Lagos, Nigeria. On Let There Be Light Fireside Chats, we talk about the electricity market in Nigeria. We discuss critically the issues facing the market with focal references to the Electricity Act 2023. On previous episodes, we've had energy experts, finance experts, as well as policy advisors come and discuss the issues, challenges, and potential solutions to the electricity market in Nigeria. One of the episodes, Mrs. Wola Joseph Kondoti mentioned that the Electricity Act 2023 is a game-changing act and that we would see the impact in 5 years. Well, we started the countdown. While we're counting down, I'm delighted to bring on our next guest, Mr. Erabor Okogun. He is a project finance expert and is currently the head Energy Infrastructure Deal Advisory KPMG, with over 20 years experience in the energy sector. He has built experience across Africa, electricity market, and renewable energy. He has successfully raised finance from International Finance Corporation, Africa Finance Corporation, raising funding commitment of over $500 million. He has worked with the World Bank on sector reforms. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much. I would want you to start with explaining to us what energy infrastructure is and how it affects the electricity market in Nigeria.
Yeah. Let me start with the power sector. Energy is both, in this context, both power, which is electricity, and also energy sources, for example, gas and hydro, which is part of our energy mix on the grid. Of the grid, in people's homes, offices, you'll have diesel generators, petrol generators providing power, the energy source being diesel or petrol. So from an infrastructure perspective, at the scale in which we're talking about it, the power sector has a value chain, and the infrastructure spreads across that value chain. And if you start from the gas or from the generation side, which can be in Nigeria's case, we get our power from gas turbines and from hydro dams. Gas pipelines are connected to the power plants, mostly in the south of the country. And then the waters and rivers, waters from the rivers that we have, principally River Niger, and I think River Kaduna, and another river, I think in somewhere around Bauchi. These are the hydro dams, and they're quite large. Kanju and Jeba alone is over 1 gigawatts. So there's the generation infrastructure. There is now the transmission infrastructure that takes the power from where it's generated, mostly in isolated parts of the country, and brings it down to the distribution, and now distributes it to homes, offices, industries across the country. So the infrastructure is generation, transmission, which is sometimes when we're traveling, maybe Lagos, Ibadan, Lagos to Benin, or anywhere else, you see these lines on the high tension lines on the towers. You know, those are the major transmission lines, and they're mostly the 330 kV lines, kilovolts. That's the size of power or voltage that it can carry. Others are the 132, and then when it now gets to the distribution, so it gets stepped down over time to the voltage that we can consume, or to the voltage the disco can consume, right? And at the distribution level, the infrastructure there are mostly feeder lines. So they are feeding from where it stepped down from the substation to transformers, and then to homes. So the infrastructure in the power space is generation, transmission, distribution, and metering. So that's what makes up the infrastructure generally. And if you add the gas pipelines, that would be the whole component of power infrastructure in Nigeria.
So how does the work you do impact the electricity market?
So we work across the value chain. In our work in KPMG, we're seen as honest brokers. We're seen as transaction advisors. We are seen also as people who help in raising of support fundraising. So, for example, we are working with the World Bank on a $500 million distribution sector recovery plan, where the World Bank is trying to incentivize investments into the sector. And our job is to verify that those investments have been made. In other instances, we are also called upon to help in sort of doing value for money. You know, an investment has been made, perhaps there's a concession that needs to be done, or an investor is coming in to acquire it. We also do the due diligence. In certain cases, sponsors come to us and say, look, we want to build a power plant, we want to invest in a power plant, we want to invest in this part of the value chain, and we do the market assessment, we do the financial modeling, we put together the business plan, the investment memorandum, identify what are the drivers to ensure that it's bankable in order to be able to attract the right kind of funding. And we also work with them and handhold them to also source and secure and help negotiate the best terms, you know, for the financing of the infrastructure. In other cases, we also work with the regulator where they've run through a program and they need a firm like KPMG to come and do an objective hand-holding to be able to bring in, to be able to create the confidence. Because sometimes people are not so confident if the government is driving certain things. They believe that, you know, certain interests or certain efficiencies may not are not there. So we do come in once in a while to support the government, and even if where there's a very efficient entity, there's that additional capacity that's always helpful. So that's, you know, a cross section of some of the work that we do.
Yeah, I'll pick on the raising funds. We have had previous guests talk about how there is need for financing in the electricity market. One of the things that the Electricity Act 2023 has encouraged is public-private partnerships. It has also, you know, tried to create a viable market where foreign investment can come to. However, there seems to be some challenges there. One of our guests mentioned that there is a dollar component, you know, to the funding, and that also affects how we generate and use electricity. What's your take on that?
Well, if it's a greenfield project, what I mean is that it's not been built. It's just a concept, an idea, as a function of an opportunity that's been identified to put a power infrastructure in place. Certainly, there is a need to do project development. Now, from conceptualization to construction, financing, and commercial operations, depending on the type of power source, in this case generation, it can take from 2 to 10 years. The more difficult projects from a financing perspective are those without a track record. So greenfield project. And therefore you need to secure an off-taker for the power. The off-taker, if it's a Nigerian off-taker, because there's with the West African power pool, you can generate power here and sell it internationally and earn dollars. Already many companies are doing that today. The off-taker is going to pay you naira because that's our legal tender. However, we don't manufacture any of the generation assets that we require, either turbines. We manufacture some cables, right? We assemble, I think, a few transformers. We assemble some solar panels. We fabricate a few structures, but the bulk has to be imported. And Nigeria's naira is not a global currency, and we're not indexed to the dollar or to the euro. If you cross into Francophone Africa, one of the beauty of that arrangement, I would say from a financing perspective, is that the CFA is indexed to the euro. So when you take the euro, there's convertibility. You can, I mean, you take the CFA, there's convertibility. But if you take the naira, we struggle with convertibility. And so you have to bring in dollars if it's an international investor, or you have to take your naira if it's a local investor, convert it to dollars, open an LC, and ship these things in. Now, if the loan is dollar denominated or partly dollar denominated, as your off-taker is paying you naira, you have to pay the financier in dollars. And there is what they call currency volatility. This week it's 1,600 or whatever it is. 2 weeks ago it was 1,500, right? That volatility is a problem because when you're converting your naira, how much naira do you need at every point in time? Then there's also, finding the dollars.
Is that not the work you do to find the dollars?
Right. I'm just saying, I'm speaking from the position of, if I'm a project developer or I'm someone who's trying to build the infrastructure, the disco. So you have to go and buy it. And in certain instances, at the volume you wanted, at the time you wanted, is not available. So that is convertibility risk. There's volatility and there's convertibility. And those have an impact on how much money can help Nigeria in financing either greenfield or expanding or refurbishing existing power assets.
In your opinion, how do you think these risks can be mitigated?
There's several risks. There's the market risk, the general market risk. There is the payment risk. There is the currency risk. And there's political risk. Starting with the latter, political risk comes from the fear of expropriation, from policy flip-flops, from lack of political will to adjust the tariff. Then currency risk is what we just talked about, which, depending on the scale, I think lenders trying to manage that, take a hedge or in certain instances, once you get your funds, you make sure that you convert naira into dollars and just keep, right? So people are doing different things. Payment risk is, I have the power plant, you are the off-taker, right? If I give you power, you should give me my money, right? But as happens a few times, for whatever reason, you don't have the money, all of it or none of it, right? And if it's on a project finance, partial risk, non-recourse basis, which is the cash flow that I'm using to pay. I'm not taking a mortgage on your property. I'm just saying, lenders are giving me money purely because of the strength of your offtake. right? And there are challenges with that. People in Nigeria have been accused of bypassing power, stealing power. So if you don't pay the disco, all he needs, given the challenges, there's not enough money to pay everybody along the value chain, right? And then obviously the market risk. Market risk, particularly on the on-grid sector, is mostly around the challenges with the tariff. Tariff is supposed to be adjusted based on inflation and based on currency exchange rates. Tendency is that it's not always that case. What has happened is a fantastic innovation by creating band A, band B, band C, band D, band E. And in band A, what the government and the regulators try to do is try and make sure that the market is not, band A is not affected by market risk. So these are the different risks that you have to navigate. And if you bring in gas, there's also this challenge of there's not enough gas. The quality of gas might be a challenge. And then there's there are several gas power plants that don't have gas. They are stranded. Or if they are 1 gigawatts, they only have 100 megawatts of gas because of gas constraints. These are some of the things that affect the market generally.
With the risks you have highlighted, the volatilities, and how we do not exactly produce so many things in Nigeria that would, make the market, get better. What financing model has proven effective for the power project infrastructure, in Nigeria?
The challenge is that there are restrictions on the size, depending on the capacity, your licenses that you require. And those licenses have obligations. And with the state's electricity market coming in on board, you now have states with their own regulation. In South Africa, for example, they realized that they need to really open the market and create an opportunity for different models. And so they've raised the threshold for which you need to go to anybody for a license of 100 megawatts for generation. So you can start a power business. Until you get 100 megawatts, you don't talk to anybody. To drive the investment in. But in terms of models, what we've seen because of the challenges is that, and I take it from the off-grid and on-grid. On the off-grid side, which is you don't need a disco, what you've seen is recently power as a service or solar as a service, SaaS or PaaS. And that is really a developer coming to you and say, you know what? If you're buying a generator, either you go to a bank to take a loan to buy the generator, like maybe 4-year loan or something, or you look for money somehow and pay upfront for that generator, go to any of the generator manufacturers and just pay the cash. What they've now started doing is that, you know what? Don't pay me anything upfront. I will deploy everything you need for your power solution. And you will agree cost. We either agree. So you look at your current energy consumption and costs, what you pay to the grid, what you self-generate, and all the things that you're buying in your house, inverters, generators, and look at what you pay on a monthly basis. So if, for example, you pay 20,000 naira a month, 50,000, whatever it is. What has proven with the power service or solar service is that you're guaranteed to have at least a 40% savings. So they will tell you, okay, this is what you're consuming. This is what you're paying. Pay me 10,000 naira instead of your 20,000 that you're paying. But just commit to pay me for the next 3 years so that I can recover my investment. And we've seen a lot of organizations, companies, and high net individuals now doing that, where you take off the burden of going to queue for diesel or petrol, right? Other options are using a core PPA where you do project finance. Again, it's a bit similar, but just on a larger scale. Others are you lease to own. So I do this in such a way that I pay a lease for the asset. So it's like you lease it, it's like a hire purchase for a car, right? And then over time, the power asset now becomes mine. So there are all of those models outside power and inside power that is now being used to drive energy access in Nigeria.
So the demand for solar has increased, like you said. However, like a couple of weeks ago, we saw that the government wants to ban importations of solar panels.
Yeah.
What's your take on that?
I mean, I cannot say anything about government policy per se, but because I've seen over time that what you read in the press may not necessarily be the accurate depiction of what it is that the government is trying to do. But generally, from 50,000 feet, if I was looking, I would say that there is perhaps a push for local content. So it's become so common, so popular. People are converting naira to dollars to bring in these things. So they're thinking, okay, maybe import substitution, maybe local content, maybe we can drive local production of these things. And there's already some efforts by the government. I think Naseni is trying to do that. In Abuja, they have a small assembly plant. There's also Oxano in Lagos. There's assembling. So there's one or two, right? That in anticipation, or right now, government is thinking, okay, how can we boost local production? But until I see the actual fine print, one cannot make a decision. One can just assume that is the idea to drive local production, local jobs, but like everything else, I would say, one, it should be phased, and there should be certain, things put in place before an outright ban, and bearing in mind that, we do have ways in which things come into the country, and it's good to be able to have a certain standard for things and let the channel for bringing things still remain orthodox, still remain official, so that the quality that the Nigerian wants, can be sort of validated.
What tax reliefs or incentives would you recommend, or do you think it's necessary for energy investments in Nigeria?
I think that there are already some tax reliefs and incentives. But unfortunately, it was a window where there was I think a waiver for bringing in panels, and that was quite helpful some years ago. But now we're seeing some signaling. So it would have been great if because in Nigeria, I think the amount of self-generation is about over $20 billion. That's me and you and others, that may have diesel and coal, and it's not in other parts it's a backup. Now it's mainstream. So there may be over 50 million people that don't have access to clean and reliable energy in Nigeria, right? So every incentive to increase energy access should be done. There's already the pioneer status that you can benefit from, which is you don't have to pay, CIT for a certain period of time, 3 years, renew it, I think 5 years, which is helpful. But if it's a new project, even most financial models you would do, first 2 years, you might not have any, you might be generating a loss because you're still trying to recover, so to speak. So perhaps what we need is like what in South Africa, where there is a reduction in the amount of permits, approvals, a reduction or a removal so for example, if you wanted to build a power asset in your village or in your community, if you have the funding and everybody agrees they will buy the power from you, in my opinion, there's no need for that level granularity of regulation. Just maybe somewhere you go and maybe just get a building permit, and just as you build it for a house, reduce the barriers. On the currency side, it's a difficult conversation. I think the IFC launched, I think, a $1 billion or so local currency financing. And we're also working on an infrastructure and guarantee facility where the idea is to be able to bring in more, have local currency financing as much as possible. If you have local currency financing and you are now converting to dollars, it's a different conversation than if you have dollar denominated financing, right? And you are now both converting and now looking for the dollars to pay. So perhaps more incentives in that regard, and reduction in regulations and permits. Just the way we're looking to have a harmonized tax law, right? I think there should be a harmonized power policy, perhaps an executive order, as you've seen for gas, that helps to reduce these barriers and increase incentives so that, high net worth individuals, organizations, communities can build our power plants and power infrastructure without, being sort of bogged down by approvals and permits.
Hello everyone, welcome to the special edition of Let There Be Light Fireside Chats. As we all know, the electricity sector has evolved with the emergence of the Electricity Act 2023. Different states have been given regulatory control over their electricity market. So, in this special edition, we'll be spotlighting commissioners, coordinators of different states and having interviews with them on how they have been driving these changes. So, you do not want to miss any of the sessions. It promises to be enlightening, so stay tuned.